Everybody has an inner magnificence. When we're little kids, we know that. You give us a couple of diaper pins and a towel, and I'm Superman, I'm Superwoman, I can change the world. But we get messages about what's wrong with us. You can't do that. You shouldn't do this. And we start believing the messages, and that becomes our story. One of the things that's happening right now on a broad scale is too many of us are making too many of our decisions based on how we feel instead of thinking about it. We don't step back and be thoughtful.
Yeah, it's okay to cry, but also understand like how you can still be, in this case, a man, right? And get your stuff done. Right. Don't feel bad for yourself, cry.
Right.
You know, but it's okay to kind of...
To have the soft side.
To have the soft side, yeah. You don't need to be just...
Yeah.
All the time.
Right.
All right, Barry, welcome to our Becoming a Better You podcast. So this is the first time we've actually ever met, talked, so yep, I'm excited.
Yep, me too. I'm looking forward to this.
So tell the viewers just a little bit about your background and what you do.
So I spent 40 years as a parish minister. I always had something else going on the side. I've taught at Emory University in the School of Theology. I've been teaching at Bryant for almost 35 years. I taught at Johnson & Wales. I also created a course for an online university on leadership. It's called Leadership for Spiritual Leaders.
Now, was this all you taught the same theology?
No, so at Emory, they had a program so a lot of the pastors, a lot of the theology students were working their way through school by serving small churches.
Okay.
So they're learning how to be a pastor while they're going to school to be a pastor. And we realized that they needed some support. And so Emory created a program called the Teaching Parish. So I sort of mentored pastors, theology students in the practical stuff, the nuts and bolts of how to run a church and how to be successful that way.
So that's incredibly interesting because the only PT patient I keep now is a priest. I've had him for probably 11 years now.
Okay.
And he's retired, right? He just retired, and they got a new priest from Canada who's a monk.
Okay.
Right? And to go into church life, being a pastor of a church, was way different than what he did before.
Sure.
So since I've been through with the whole journey, like I see what they didn't teach him,
right?
Even though he was a priest,
right?
And this is like Eastern Orthodox Catholic. But yeah, there's stuff that like even at his age and being a priest for how many years, taking over parish, there's stuff that he didn't know.
New game.
A whole new game.
Yeah.
So I think that it's just like, if I was a physical therapist and they just gave us all these theories, but never taught us how to treat patients.
Right.
And this is a topic for another day, but I think that's how a lot of school is.
Yeah.
They don't give you like the practical application.
Right.
I mean, you seem like a practical guy as well.
I try to be, yeah.
And so now we're retired?
So semi-retired. I'm still teaching at Bryant. I'm still teaching at the Holmes Institute for Consciousness Studies, which is this online university, and write a book. And
we're going to talk about that.
I'm still writing. So what happened to me was, it kind of goes along with what you were saying. I was serving churches, and in the process of helping people, realized that I had a lot to learn. There's a lot of stuff I didn't know. So just for example, I was serving a small church, and it was a family. A woman and 3 kids would come to church. Her husband was an alcoholic, and he would come once or twice a year, Christmas and Easter kind of thing. But the wife got her reputation as being a saint for living with him. And so one day I get a call, 15-year-old daughter, the oldest child, and she said, "Daddy's drinking, and Mom and Daddy are fighting, and they're running around the table with a butcher knife, and would you come?" So I put on my Superman cape, and I took off like a crazy man, and got there. And it was really funny, because when I got there, it was like the preacher's coming, so everybody's sitting quietly, and it had all calmed down. And she told me that she had called her brother, and he was going to come get her and the kids and take them away. And so the brother-in-law pulls in, and now he's going to be the hero, and he's going to go after this SOB that's given his sister and nieces and nephews such a hard time. So the husband, went in the back bedroom, got a shotgun. Now he's going to kill this guy.
This is when you're there?
This is when I'm there, for interfering in his family life. And I'm wrestling this guy with a shotgun, screaming for them to get out of there, trying to keep people from getting hurt. What I know now is call the cops.
Yeah. Right.
And get there right after the cops do.
Yeah, exactly. That would probably be,
But I had this complex of I can save everybody. And so the short story is I went back to graduate school, came to move from Georgia up to Boston, got my doctorate. And interesting, you talk about a priest, because my first job out of graduate school was I was the director of the counseling center at La Salette Shrine.
Okay.
Made the Bishop of Fall River very nervous that I'm not a Catholic, and here I was at the head of the counseling center there. But I've always had this fascination with the combination of spirituality and psychology, and where they meet. I call myself a scientific theologian. If you can imagine a Venn diagram, and if you take spirituality, philosophy, and psychology, where those meet is where the truth is.
I agree.
Because growing up in the church, I was a very conservative family. But once I learned about the birds and the bees, and they're teaching me this about the virgin birth stuff, I'm thinking, wait a minute, how does this work? And the line in my family was, you just have to accept things on faith. And if you start questioning something, then you question everything. And
it falls apart.
I'm thinking,
yeah,
you do. But that was their fear. So I've always, something can't be true one place and not true another place.
Yeah, you need a consistency, continuity.
It's either true everywhere all the time, or it's not. So that's kind of where I come from.
And so for you, then, you said something really interesting. You learned that you can't help everybody.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And I think that's one thing that people need to accept, whether it's in your field, whether it's the medical field. Like, you can only help people who want to be helped.
Yeah.
Right? I had a consult, because when people, they can't just come into my studio, I meet with them.
Okay.
Right? For many reasons. But one of the reasons is I can't want this for you more than you want it for yourself. Right? So as we go through, what your goals are and what we do, well, then we get to, okay, we want to work together. Cool. Okay, now this is the transaction, right? So we spend dollars on things we care about. Your health.
Absolutely.
All right. So we give the price, and, it's not cheap, but it's the value you place on it.
Right.
And I was like, all right, well, how about she's like, no, I don't know if I can do that. Okay. So you're the one who takes care of your son and your mother? Yeah. Okay. So what happens if you get sick, or you're in the hospital, or you die? And she goes, well, they'll be better off. They'll get the insurance. Okay. So I prodded a little bit later. And then I was like, we'll do 2 payments of it, right? Make it easy for her. No. So then I have to be like, listen, you're not ready for this.
Yep.
You don't sign don't sign up.
Yep.
Right? Because if you already told me that they're fine, they'll get the insurance, you're not ready to make a change. Right? Because you literally told me your son and your mom, who you are the primary caregiver for, would be better if you were dead.
Yeah.
I can't help you.
Yeah.
Right? And I think that's something that even in PT, you want to help everybody. But then you realize there's some that want the help and some that don't.
Yeah.
So let me just help the ones that try to help everybody.
Right.
But you really help the ones that want the help.
Right.
And they make the change.
Right.
Did you experience that?
Yeah. At one point in my career, I was exploring the idea of being a consultant for church growth. And I talked to the guy at the time who was internationally kind of the guy for that. And I said, what's one piece of advice you can give me? And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, you can't help a bum client.
Yeah, it's true. And so this brings me to another topic about labels.
Okay.
So labels that we give ourselves, and then labels that other people give us, right? Because to me, labels are just thoughts that we think about ourselves, or someone told us that we believe.
Yep.
And I think your TED Talk hit on this a little bit as well.
Absolutely.
Can you tell me, or them and me, what labels are, and how we can change them.
Well, what happens to us? So my thing is about everybody has an inner magnificence. When we're little kids, we know that. You give us a couple of diaper pins and a towel, and I'm Superman, I'm Superwoman, I can change the world. But we get messages about what's wrong with us. You can't do that. You shouldn't do this. And we start believing the messages. And that becomes our story then. I can't. I tell the story about I couldn't wait to be old enough to try out for Little League. And I was so proud when I got my uniform. What I found out later on was I didn't make the cut for Little League. This was the league for all the kids that weren't good enough for Little League. But I remember getting my uniform, and I wore it to bed that night. I was so proud. It was funny because probably 25 years later, I ran into my Little League coach from those times, and I said, I must have been the worst player you ever tried to coach. And he said, no, you were second. That's how bad I was. But I loved it. But I got the message in lots of ways, directly and indirectly, that I wasn't any good. When I was...
And did you accept that as being true?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Do you think it would have been different if you had a different coach or mentor who built you up and made you believe?
He did the best he could, I think, all things being equal.
You just weren't going to be good.
But I wasn't going to be good.
Okay.
I was the kid that I swung at the bad ones and let the good ones go by.
That's like my dating life. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Just a joke. Just a joke.
Yeah. So, I was the smallest kid in my class up until the 7th grade, and then I met Milton Pittman, and finally there was somebody shorter than I was, but it took 7 years to get there. So I was a kid. I loved school, and I loved sports, but I wasn't athletic, and I believed that about myself. And then when I was in my late 60s, I was semi-retired. Life was good, but it was kind of boring. I was doing okay. Everything was good, but that's just kind of what it was. And I can still remember my wife and I were out at the Cape, and I was scrolling through Facebook, a bad habit of mine, and I came across an ad for the Oh My Goddard Sprint Triathlon. And I never knew there was such a thing. I knew about the Hawaii Ironman.
Yeah.
And what incredible athletes those folks were. But I started looking at it, and it's like it's a half a mile of open water swim. It's a 12-mile bike ride. It's a 5K trail run. And I think I know how to swim, and I've got a bike, and I've got sneakers. I can do this.
So now let me stop you for a second. So, but the label up until that point, till we were 60, was athletics wasn't your thing.
Absolutely.
Why do you think then was your brain like, well, maybe this is?
So what happened to me, I see this ad and I think, okay, I can do this. And then I go to and I ran into a friend that I hadn't seen in a while, and I told him what I was doing. He said, "Oh, you got to take the classes for this." And I said, "Okay." So I went to the first swim class, and I found out, oh, it's not a swimsuit. You have to wear a wetsuit for insurance purposes. So that's a pretty big investment. It's not like the wetsuits you get at Job Lot.
I don't think I trust those.
It's ones that have real thin, so you got all the arm movement and everything. So, okay. So then I showed up for the bike clinic, and they said, well, you've got a hybrid. And I said, yeah, I know I've got a hybrid. You can't do this in a hybrid. You need a road bike. So there's another almost $1,000. And then we did the trail run, and he said, those are just regular, those are running shoes. And you got to go to a store that sells running shoes. So I go there, and the guy's fitting me for running shoes, and he says, are those technical socks? And I'm like, technically they're socks. so I didn't even have the right socks. That's how much I didn't know. And then when I did the first open water swim practice, I had my first ever in my life full-fledged panic attack. And what happened to me is, up to that point, I didn't even know a triathlete. And here I am training with triathletes.
So what do you think made you take that jump?
I like challenges.
Okay.
I like new things. I like to learn. Yeah. And I thought this was realistic. But what happened to me is I'm in the water, and I'm psychologically I'm in over my head.
Yep. Makes sense. Synchronicity. Yeah.
And the funny thing is, I don't know if you've ever worn a wetsuit, but it's like a giant floaty, and you're in salt water. You can't sink.
Right, okay.
And the real funny thing was, the tide was out, and had I known, I could have stood up. But I'm flailing in the water with this panic attack. But the woman, the coach that was running it, got in my face and said, "Barry, you're a triathlete, and you know how to swim. Now swim." And it's like something went off in my head, like, that's a label.
She relabeled you.
She relabeled me.
And I think that from my experience, it's about frame. So like here's the thing I always say. Medical professionals don't heal people.
Right.
They just give you the hope so you can heal yourself.
Right.
Right. And so when I'm a physical therapist, I have the frame. Right. They come into my clinic. I'm the expert. I'm like, no, Barry, like, it's fine. It's just muscular.
Yeah. Yeah.
3 months of warrior just gone. Because
right.
You're right. But in that case, she was the expert. And
right.
she took control of the situation
right.
and relabeled you, which you accepted as being true.
Right.
Then that's what changed you.
Right.
Right. So that's what we try to do when we talk to people. It's like we have to peel back the layers of the onion.
Yep.
To re-input something. Because you've thought that for, at that point, 60 years.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right? Which is why I was interested as to why you thought you could do it in the first place. But you said you like challenges, right? Maybe it was yourself being like unfulfilled from before not being athletic, and now going into doing this, and then you got there, but then you had that coach that you needed when you were in Little League,
right?
But you got her then,
right?
That's what you know,
right? And I I know how to swim, I know how to ride a bike, I know how to walk or run or jog. So those pieces I felt confident about. But putting them together and putting a label on,
yes,
is another thing.
Right.
Years ago, I saw an interesting interview with Mike Krzyzewski, coach of Duke basketball.
Yep.
And Michael Phelps, and all the gold medals that he's won. And they were talking about the relationship between athletes and coaches. And the conclusion they came to was that the coach sees your potential and creates a plan
that you accept.
And holds you accountable.
Right.
And eventually you buy into the vision and the plan will get you there.
Right.
And that's what a value of a coach is.
And
that's what you do.
Yeah. So I first started doing that in jiu-jitsu, right? And then as a physical therapist, right, we set the plan for you.
Yep.
But even more so now in our transformation weight loss, right? We give you accountability, we give you nutrition, we talk with you even out of the studio. And we tell people, hey, listen, like, so you could be the best tennis player in the world. You could be an Olympian. You don't walk onto Wimbledon by yourself, right? You have a whole staff.
Right.
When you're trying to lose weight, you need a coach behind you that can help you, that can make you avoid pitfalls and just get you there faster, right? So it's the same thing.
Right.
Now, I was watching your TED Talk, and one of the most interesting things that you did was show the rock, which I wanted you to bring.
Okay.
Can you tell me the story and use the rock as an example?
Yes. So I knew that I wanted to talk about inner magnificence. And if we were talking religion, it's the spirit of God within. But there's a magnificence that we all have. Whatever label you want to put on it, it's there. And as we go through life, we get messages and it gets covered up. Some people break out and they still know it's there. I think most of us would like to think it's there, but it's not what our experience is. And some of us have been so beaten up by life that we don't even know that it's there anymore.
And those are the three types of people you talk about, right? And those are the
three types of people.
Can you just repeat the three types of people then?
Yes. So there's some of us that know there's something magnificent about us. There's some of us that would like to think it's there, but that's not how we're living our life. And then there's some of us that have been so beaten up by life that we don't even know it's there. We've got really lost touch with it.
And I would say a lot of that is developed in childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Parenting.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, shame on me. my daughter, really bright girl, but I can remember it was probably the second or maybe third grade. She came home and she had all A's except for B in handwriting. So what did I pay attention to?
Yeah.
Okay, Christy, from now on, when you come home, you get a snack, and then we're going to work on your handwriting. Now, nobody has worse handwriting than I do.
Well, you're a doctor.
Yeah, that was part of my qualification. But that's what we do, is we point out people's faults.
Right.
And then that becomes their identity, instead of looking at, wow, look what you did, and praising the accomplishment. So anyway, back to your original question. So what I was going to do with my TED Talk is I was going to hold up an acorn and say, in that acorn knows everything it needs to know to become the most magnificent oak tree you can imagine. And whether or not it does is going to depend primarily on the environment. Is it going to have enough soil, nutrients from the soil? Is it going to have enough water? Is it going to have enough sunlight? And is it going to have enough room to grow? Well, one of the pieces of advice I was given about a TED Talk is watch a whole bunch of them as you're preparing. And one night, like 3 o'clock in the morning, I'm watching these things, and I see a guy stand up to start his TED Talk holding an acorn. And I was just crushed. He didn't do with it what I was going to, but I couldn't do that.
But I like the rock. I think the rock's better.
So what happened?
I mean, it's even your logo. You wouldn't want to have an acorn on your shirt right now.
No.
Right.
Well, I don't know. But anyway, so I went up and I told my wife, and she said, Barry, you got a geode. Think about that. So that wasn't the one I had. But so on the outside, this looks like a rock. And that's just what it looks like. But somebody that knows rocks
it just looks normal.
Looks into it and says, oh, no, that's not just a rock. And you turn it, and there's something really beautiful inside. But the neat thing about this one is, but if you keep looking, there's the butterfly inside, the transformation you're talking about.
Yep.
And so that's really kind of what I'm about, is helping those of us that feel like rocks.
Yep.
Know that there's a lot more to us. There's something magnificent. And my book came about, so I told you I was a parish minister for 40 years, off and on. I had a kind of a love-hate relationship with that role. I would quit and come back and quit and come back. But when I retired, prior to retirement, I would always write the weekly newsletter cover that would be a tease for whatever the lesson was going to be. And I had a tagline is, and I'll be looking for you Sunday. And when I retired, I realized I missed writing. So I just started writing some stuff for me. And I shared it with some people, and they said, well, you need to write a book. So I started writing some things, but I missed having a tagline. So my writing style kind of evolved into, I'll tell you a story, and then I'm going to give you an invitation to action. I'm going to have you to do something, invite you to do something. And then the tagline is, and the extent to which you accept my invitation is the extent to which you'll be able to say, I feel good about being me. So that's kind of my goal, is for everybody to go to bed at night feeling good about themselves and who they are. And I've got a whole 101 invitations.
And they're all like small stories.
They're all small stories. Yeah. I have a friend who bought the book, looked at it, and she said, I'm going to give this to my husband and tell him to take it with him in the bathroom instead of his cell phone. It's like the old Reader's Digest.
Yeah,
That's about how long.
Of course. So I was reading some of the comments on the TED Talk, and it was from one of your students. And she said, on the first day of class, you talked about a flashpoint. Do you remember what you said to her?
No, I don't.
All right, because that was the question I had.
Okay.
Right, you didn't see these questions beforehand.
No.
She said, you were a great professor. This is what I think she meant by it. Maybe she said the wrong term, but basically, I'm assuming like a moment of genius. Like everybody has it. And she was like, you were going to help them unlock that, right? I'm assuming that's what you meant by flashpoint, right? And I believe we actually download ideas from our higher self, our inner being, God, whatever, boom. And when we're connected, when we're happy, that's when we're connected. So that's when we get those flashpoints, right? It's the same reason why like Einstein would get these revelations,
right?
You keep yourself so you're connected, which is why people who are unhappy or sad or depressed don't often do anything because they're not connected to the true being.
Right.
And
they're cut off from that energy.
They're cut off, right? It's also why when you're having fun and you're loving life, you're not tired. It's the same reason why when you're extremely tired, there's a lot of resistance in your thoughts or what's going on. Okay, so let's say I'm the rock.
Okay.
How are you going to unlock me? What do we do?
So I'm going to invite you to. So here's one that I just wrote about. There's a reason that in the creation story, it says there was evening and there was morning the first day. There was evening and there's morning. And what a lot of us have lost touch with is we set up our day the night before, either consciously or not. And those of us that have partied too much at night know we've set up our day.
Yes, it's not going to be good.
What I'm going to invite you to do is be conscious about what your mind frame is when you go to bed at night. And I had this thing with my kids. Kind of the ritual was, what was the nicest thing that anybody did for you today? What are you grateful for today? And what was the nicest thing you did for somebody else today? Because I wanted them to be aware of life is about serving and appreciation, gratitude. And if I go to bed and those are the things I'm thinking about, instead of all of the stuff that I need to do and all the stuff that didn't go right, if I start my ritual of going to bed in a state of gratitude and service, I'm going to have a much better day the next day, and I'm going to feel better about myself.
I agree with that. So that's basically you're getting, in my terms, this is kind of fun because we believe the same things and we talk a little bit differently, right? Which is the purpose of conversation. But basically you're setting your alignment the night before, your vibration the night before to like appreciation. So the vibration of love and appreciation are the same. They're the highest on the scale.
Right.
So you're basically setting the intention. So then when you wake up, that's where you last left.
Right.
That's where you pick up.
Right.
And I've heard that like aligned action, so action that you're happy about, you're inspired to do, is way more powerful than out of aligned action. So an example of like out of aligned action, everybody does something because they think they'll feel better in doing it or having it. Right. That's why we do everything.
Absolutely.
But when we're not aligned, the choices we make are not the most productive. Right. Why people do drugs? They want to feel better.
And they do in the moment.
In the moment, yes. Long term, it doesn't. Right. So I think that's key, and that makes total sense to me. Where if you have somebody who's not vibrating at the level you want them to, bring it back internally, be a beacon of light for yourself and others, right?
Yeah.
And then take it out into the world.
Yeah. Absolutely. So one of the other things another invitation I have is to create a not to do list.
Okay.
We're good at to do lists. And so that's another thing. Rather than working from a to-do list, work from a schedule. So I tell people, unless it's on your calendar, it doesn't count.
Okay.
So you can take everything that's on your to-do list. You tell me when you're going to do it. Because if it's not there, it's probably not going to get done. But the other thing is a not to-do list and your like weight loss thing. So I'm really have an issue with anything with frosting. If it has frosting, it's for me.
I got you.
Like going to Dunkin' Donuts, I can tell myself, okay, don't get the frosted cinnamon roll today. But what's the image in my mind? The frosted cinnamon roll.
Right.
But if I tell myself, so if I take the not to do and turn it into to do. So what I'm going to do is when I go to Dunkin' Donuts, I'm only going to make healthy choices. Accomplishes the same thing, but the image in my mind, because the way our brain works, our brain doesn't comprehend the negative qualifiers.
Okay. Yep.
If I said whatever you do, Marc, right now, whatever you do, don't imagine a green hippopotamus.
Exactly.
But if I said imagine a pink giraffe.
So I think that attention is when you think of something that's attention, that brings it to you, right? And that makes total sense because when you want to manifest something, right, you want to think about that item or that thing happening to you. A lot of times what we do is we want to avoid this thing happening to
Right.
me. But we think about
Right.
avoiding that thing. Well, in my terms, the universe doesn't know no.
Correct.
It just knows what you're thinking about.
Yes.
It also doesn't know if that thing has really happened or you're just imagining it. It still brings it to you.
Yes.
So it's basically the same thing.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Focus on what you want versus what you're
trying to avoid.
Yeah. And another thing I wanted to say too is you talked about kids and how we focus on the negative or whatever. Well, a lot of times it's because the parents are already disconnected, right? I've had the privilege, and why did I write a kids book? I've been teaching kids since I've been 15, martial arts. So I've been around kids 5 and older my whole life.
Okay.
So like they never left me because in order to be a successful teacher of children, you have to think like them.
Right.
Right? You have to come up with different games. Kids learn through play. So it never left me. And one of the things is that as kids get older, we beat the positivity out of them.
Right.
Because that's how the world is.
Right.
Right? But when you have a 3-year-old kid, they're as happy as can be, but you want to control him
right.
by labeling with don't do this, don't do that, versus understanding that he or she is just expressing themselves.
Yeah.
Right? As long as they're not going to get hurt.
Right.
Like, obviously there's some things you need to teach them.
Right.
But we beat it out of them by the age of 3.
Right.
And that's what I've learned. We're basically saying similar things.
Yeah. I mean, one of the saddest things about our educational system is there are kids that can't wait to start school. And by the time they're in the 5th grade, they hate school.
Now, you love school.
I did.
Now, I have an interesting theory about this because you were one of the smallest kids in the class.
Yep.
And you started school early.
I did.
Okay. One of my best friends, now I obviously was never the tallest, right?
Right.
But I did the martial arts since I've been 8.
Okay.
So muscular. I was doing pull-ups in 6th grade, like 7 or 8. I always had strength. So even though I was short, I was muscular. Well, one of my best friends, like he was shorter, he was a little taller than me, but scrawny, right? But he late birthday, November,
right?
I always said when I have a kid, I want them to be born in March or the beginning of and I actually heard that there's a book about this, birth order, because what happens is when you start school early, you're underdeveloped.
Right.
Everybody else is already more developed than you. That affects your psyche because everybody's bigger.
Right. Yep.
Is that your experience?
Absolutely.
So I want to get a couple questions, but do you think if you waited a year and started school a year later, do you think you would have turned out differently?
It's hard to know.
Oh, yeah.
It's hard to know. Probably. What I know is I would have turned out different. I don't know whether it would have been better or worse.
Exactly. And and now here's my thing, right? So if you were, this was the question I was going to ask you, and I'm asking you now. If you were always smaller, then you're going to choose where you excel, school, because it's not an athletic competition.
Right.
It's an intellectual competition.
Right.
And we do things more of that we're good at. Right. So, and that led you on your journey.
Right.
Am I right about that? Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, for me, so I loved school before I knew I wasn't an athlete.
Okay. All right.
So it wasn't like I can't succeed here, so I'm going to go here. I love school and I love playing games. But it was the so I kept doing okay in school. I was bright enough, but it was once I got old enough for Little League, and also in recess when the self-appointed captains would choose up teams at recess. Not only would I be the last one picked, they would fight over who had to take me, and then there would be negotiations. Well, if we take Fleet, then you got to give me this one to kind of compensate for the liability we just took on.
And I would say that makes you double down in being smarter than them.
It may well have.
Right. And I think one of the best pieces of advice my mother gave me was, you want to be nice to everybody. And that always stuck with me. And that was kind of my ethos, like going, now listen, if I bust on you, it means I really like you. Right. Because I like to have fun.
Yep.
But like, I at the end of our conversation, our meeting, like I want you to feel better about yourself. I want you to be more confident.
Yep.
That's what made me a great therapist. Right.
Sure.
Like people knew exactly what I knew, but it's the way I delivered my message.
Yep.
It's the way that when you told me about your pain, I redirected you to like the football game.
Yeah.
Why? Because you're going to be talking about your pain 24/7. So when you come to me as your therapist, I'll give you hope, and we're going to change the subject.
Yeah.
And we're going to joke around.
Yeah.
Because why? You heal yourself, right? And if you're in that constant pain, you can't think positively, right? You just keep recreating it because the universe does not know no.
Right. Right. Yeah. We create what we think about. And like you say, the more I think about my pain, the more painful it is.
And I think too, I know you run the men's group,
right?
And we'll talk about that in a second. I had one of my buddies on here who's a nurse practitioner, psychology, and he was talking about it's okay to feel emotions, right? Life isn't supposed to be all rainbows and butterflies, right? In a sense, you need contrast to develop and to become something else, right? Expand. But I think a lot of times when people feel, like a lot of times I feel unfulfilled, right? Like you could write a book, cool. It was more fun writing the book than publishing the book, right? But it's like, oh, you gotta do something else.
Right.
But I understand that's normal. Like obviously you'd always love to be happy, but like for me personally, like if I'm stressed, I go to the gym, I work out, like I do a project, I do something. And I think a lot of times today, people turn towards medication because they don't want to feel that way.
Right.
Versus almost embracing the suck,
right?
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Do you see that a lot in like counseling?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I have a private practice also as a therapist. And at one point, was dealing with some heroin addicts, and I used to say to them, "You can either feel better or get better. But if you're going to get better, you're going to feel really lousy for a while because there's nothing I can do for you that's going to make you feel as good as heroin."
Right.
You have to go through that painful stuff to get to where you want to be, or you can take a shortcut that's not going to end well.
And I think for me, one of the best things I ever did was do the martial arts at a young age, especially as a man, right? The discipline you learn, right? Listen, you fail so many times in the martial arts, you get thrown down, you get choked out, but you got to get back up, right? It's the whole Rocky thing.
Yep.
And for me, I never wanted a shortcut because like in the martial arts, especially back then, you did so many repetitions of movements. I can't tell you how many, but it was normal. Like that's what you grew up. Like you're standing in a horse stance doing this or doing knuckle push-ups at age 10 on the floor or getting thrown on the concrete. Like that was normal.
Yeah.
You didn't think that, so now I didn't want any shortcuts. Like that's what it was. So I don't take shortcuts now.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that really helped me through my journey. Like, yeah, I'm going to run a podcast. I don't know what I'm doing. I can talk to people.
Yeah.
Right. But let's set this up.
Yeah.
And Barry comes in and he's too strong and he knocks the mic over.
Yeah.
Right. Let's fix it. Put it back together. So, I think nowadays, and we can talk about men, they don't want to go through that, what you would call a hero's journey, and become a better version of themselves. Can you tell me what the men's group is and what you try to do with it?
Yeah, so it's a group of guys. We meet at 8:00 for an hour or so every Sunday night, and it's based on, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey.
Yes. What did he write?
What he did, he looked at mythology and realized that every culture has a story of the hero's journey.
Okay.
And you start out like born into a normal family or something, and then you leave the family and you realize the world isn't what you thought it was. And it's like so Lancelot or whoever, Buddha, Jesus, had to go through the temptations and the time alone in the wilderness and the temptations. But we go through the hard part of life. We've got choices. We can either stay at home, and I see a lot of 30 and 40-year-old guys that are still living home with their parents, or we can make the hard thing and go out and deal with life and wrestle with the demons or whatever they are. Always in the hero's journey, you run into somebody that will support you, whether it's a fairy or whether it's Yoda, or absolutely, there's somebody that kind of helps you tap into the deeper part of you.
And I think for me, it was my martial arts senseis.
Yes,
right,
absolutely.
At a young age.
Yeah. So we have it's an annual cycle, and we go through Right now, we're in the kingship phase, and one of the things that the kings do is they take care of the land. They take care of the people in the land. So they come back from their own journey and say, okay, what does the land need? What do the people need for healing? And how do I provide that? How to create healing and peace in the land? And that's kind of every leader's goal,
right?
Or at least from my perspective. So right now we're talking about. So what is it I have to give the world that will make the world a better place? So that's kind of where we are in the cycle right now.
And so why did you have to feel like you had to start that? Did you feel that men these days are not doing that? Are they lacking something?
I think men are. So I grew up in the South. One of my claims to fame was in the senior superlatives. I don't know if they still do it in high school.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah,
all of that stuff. Yeah. So I was the most polite. That was not the best athlete, the most polite. But there are kind of rules about what a man does.
Can you tell me those rules?
Yeah. If a woman comes in the room, you stand up. You always address elders with sir or ma'am. You look people in the eye. You hold the door for people. You honor the elderly, and you are gentle with the children.
Yep.
I remember. So as back in the 70s, when the women's liberation movement really started to take off, Betty Friedan and those folks, they were kind of redefining what a woman was, but that also had repercussions for what that means for what a man is. I know that when I first got married, I grew up. My family was a very traditional family. My dad went to work. My mother was the homemaker, and then when I first got married, my wife was making more money than I was, and that was a real threat to me because I'm not. I'm supposed to be the breadwinner here, and you're bringing home more bread than I am, and that felt very threatening to me. So as the women's movement gained power, and it needed to, it made men have to redefine, kind of figure out things. I remember the first time a woman held the door for me, and it's like,
did that not happen before?
No.
Okay.
No, I was always the one. Very mindful of holding the door for people. And then here's a woman who's holding the door for me to go through. And there's this moment. Do I insult her by saying no, push her out of the way?
The door.
Or do I just go ahead and do that? And so I think a lot of men have really had a hard time figuring out how to be a man in today's world. We know how to be macho and be jerks. But we haven't found that middle place. I tease when I teach at Bryant, I'm teaching Intro to Psychology, and I talk about. I say to the women, "How do you feel about dating a guy that cries?" And they kind of squirm a little bit. And I say, you say you want a guy that's in touch with his feelings, but then he cries, and he's a sissy. He's a crybaby. You don't want that. And kind of what they have come up with is it's okay for him to cry as long as he doesn't cry more than I do.
So that goes to a good point. So I think that men, in everybody, you have masculine traits and feminine traits, right? I don't think you're all one of the other. I don't think you should be. However, if you are a man, I think there needs to be more percentage of you being a man, right? Yeah. I also think that you need to be a rock, because women are more emotional, men are more logic, right? We know this from science.
Right.
So if women are innately going to be more emotional, you can't be as emotional because that dynamic won't work. The whole relationship will be volatile. So a man needs to be more of a rock where you can kind of calm the woman down from having all these emotions, right? To make the union work. Now, I guess it could be the other way, but I think this is why the women in your class laugh, because they innately know, though, like, this man has to protect me. This man has to provide for me. If he's home crying, he can't do that.
Right.
So biologically, that's not attractive to them.
Right.
Right? And I think that Nowadays, what we're finally seeing is that many people are single because the dynamics are offset.
Right.
They don't work anymore.
Right.
Right? Like, yeah, you could say that you want a man who cries all the time and stuff like that, but when it comes down to it, if that's the man you're picking, that's not the life you're going to want to live, as far as I'm concerned. Right.
No, and so you're right. I mean, so developmentally, the first 6 weeks in the womb, we are feminine. And it isn't until the 6th week of development that the Y chromosome kicks in that says, okay, no, we're going to make this one into a boy. And it goes down a different assembly line.
Yeah.
But Carl Jung talked about the yin and the yang, the anima and the animus, masculine and feminine energy. And his contention was that we got too caught up in like the football quarterback that marries the head cheerleader. You've got all the masculine energy and all the feminine energy, and you put that together. And his contention was, no, what you have is two half people.
Okay.
Who come together to make a person. That what we need is, I need to be in touch with my masculine and my feminine side, and then find a woman who is in touch with her feminine and her masculine side. And now you have two whole people who can come together to make something really creative and powerful.
I think to find both of those people, individually, they'd have to do a lot of work on themselves to be that.
Absolutely.
Right. And I don't think many people do that.
Right.
So that's a hard union, right?
It's a life's journey.
That's what I'm saying. You'd be like 75 and then you meet each other. But that's really interesting because, I think that, everyone has different preferences. And this is the thing that kind of gets me, like, so when someone has a different opinion of yours or you have a different opinion of theirs, it's a preference, right? You don't need to go yelling at you because you have a different opinion. I don't care what your opinion is, right? You do you. Right. You have a good life.
Right.
We're good.
Right.
So when we have all these demonstrations of, pressing against this person doing that, as long as you're not killing anybody or hurting anybody, I don't care what you do.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And I think people get too caught up in not having their own locus of control and fixing their own life, but maybe because they're disconnected, they see something and that gets them away. Like I'm pretty centered in what I do through that, working out, setting goals, right? Trying to be in that vibration of love and appreciation. I don't get off put a lot, right? Like, okay, cool. Like, it's fine, Barry. I don't care what you did.
Yeah.
We're good.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother, like people cut me off like on the street. Oh, whatever. Yeah. I'm listening to my tunes.
Yeah.
Now, obviously you might get that knee-jerk reaction, but I can center myself pretty quickly because I've done the work.
Right.
That's how I live.
Right.
So when people come into this men's group, everyone's different. I understand that. What are they lacking?
Consciousness.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So much of what we do, we're not even aware of what we're doing. I sometimes use the example of people who bite their fingernails. They're often not aware they're biting their fingernails when they're doing it until you call attention to it. So your example of you're driving and somebody cuts you off, there's a knee-jerk reaction. Unless I make the decision, that's not the kind of person I want to be, then that's how I'm going to go through life, a knee-jerk reaction. And I think you talked about the demonstrations, and I think one of the things that's happening right now on a broad scale is too many of us are making too many of our decisions based on how we feel instead of thinking about it. We don't step back and be thoughtful about this. There's this big thing, whatever else you're going to be kind. I think that's a great awareness, because we can all get in our way and do some unkind things unless I have made a decision. No, that's not the kind of person I want to be. Right.
That means you have to know yourself.
You do.
Yeah.
You do. And you have to decide. You talked about the weight loss transformation. I've got a friend who is cutting sugar out of his life. And he said for him, there was a big difference. He used to say, no, I can't have that. No, I can't have that. And now he says, no, I don't eat that anymore.
Okay.
So he's taken the power from the situation. He said, no, that's just not me. I don't do that.
So one of my favorite quotes, and I've said on this podcast a few times, is circumstances don't matter, only state of being matters.
Yeah.
Right? One of the guys I look up to, Alex Hormozy. So he's basically the one who taught me how to run a gym, right? He's blown up on social media now. I always said before he blew up, he knows business like I know jujitsu.
Okay.
The way he talks about it, that's exactly the way I would talk about jujitsu. So I knew that I have to learn from this guy. He was on a podcast with it's like Tom Ballou. He's the guy who made Quest Nutrition.
Okay.
I'd never seen him before, but on the podcast, this guy Tom, who exited Quest Nutrition for like $500 million, whatever it was, he said that you may blame your circumstances, but no one else will care.
Right.
And I wrote that down.
I like that.
Right? So my question to you is, there's people who unfortunately have trauma at a young age. Some of them make it out and blossom, and some don't. What would you say is the difference for the people who, they have trauma, something really bad happened when they were younger, and then they took that contrast and became something greater than they would have come before, and some people just stay there?
Right. And that's a really interesting question. And we've done a lot of study about PTSD and folks in the military. And some folks go through some really horrible things and they come home with pretty severe cases of PTSD. And other folks have gone through the same thing and they come home and they're okay. And trying to figure out, so what is it that makes a difference? And we really haven't been able to pin that down. What we do know is that there's something very resilient in the human spirit. But what the key is still seems to be elusive. What you were talking about with your hero, I do a workshop called The Science of Success. People aren't there are laws about success.
We going Napoleon Hill here?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can go there. And Jack Canfield. And whether you know the law or not, if you're successful, you're using the law, if you look at it. But if you know the laws, you can use it. And I use a diagram. If you imagine a rear wheel drive car, one of the rear wheels is my physiology, what's going on in my body. And I don't have direct control over that. The other is my feelings, my emotions. When I say you can't change your physiology, it's like that saying that used to be, don't let them see you sweat. Have you ever made yourself stop sweating because you were nervous, or made yourself stop blushing? You can't do that. But on the front, you've got a wheel that has to do with how you think and the other with what you do. I have control over how I steer my car.
Correct.
I've got this stuff that's driving me, but I always have control over what I do and what I think. Change your thinking, change your life.
So that gives me two great points. I don't believe you can have a great life without having a sound mind and sound body, which means even if you try to think positively, if you're not working out, it's not going to happen, right? On the flip side, if you just work out, but you have negative thoughts, right? Yeah. You're not going to be able to keep your body healthy anyway. So for me, it's like you need to work on both of those. I was young and I saw Oprah, right? And she had Maya Angelou on. I might have been in high school. And Maya Angelou was like, you have your mind, your body, and your spirit. These are three things you need to work on. And that, sometimes you hear things and they just stick with you. Right? Yeah. I was like a 16-year-old boy. There's no reason that should have stuck with me. Right. But I guess because of the martial arts, I was kind of tilted in that way. Sure. You need to work on your mind, right? Went to school, my graduate degree, my body, work out every day, right? This is what I do. My spirit, learn about, for me, the medical physical stuff. And you need to have both. So if somebody really wants to make a change, the easiest place to do that is start working on their health. Because once you start feeling better, then your thoughts become more in line. It's really hard to have good, positive thoughts when you're sick. Yeah. Right? Because you bring your body everywhere with you. It's cool, be like, yeah, Barry, just think positively. But you're bleeding, right? You're not thinking positive right now. Right. So I think that's what people need. Now, the other thing with that is that I think that emotions are a feedback system for what you're thinking. Between your physical self and for what you would say like your God self, right? So you have two things. So I believe that you have a spirit, right?
Right.
Well, your spirit didn't just leave up there and come down here. So there's a spirit up there of you in here. Well, in this physical reality, you have your mind. And so you get your feedback, your inspiration from your spirit, right? Your inner being, what I would call it. And the emotions are the feedback. So if your emotions are what we would consider negative, you know in your physical self, you're not thinking correctly. That's not how God sees it or your inner being.
Right.
When Erica's like, hey, I got this guy, I think he'd be great for your podcast. I'm like, all right. Like, so in my head, I'm like, all right, like, I'll like send me his stuff.
Right.
And then I looked you up and I was like, oh, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
Right. I was like,
yeah.
But, people just say stuff. So that was my feedback system being like, and I knew that everything is synchronicity because we had to attract each other. Right. Because there's no in the universe.
Right.
So I understood it would be a good podcast. But what do you think about that? I don't know if you ever heard that where like your emotions are feedback for what you're thinking.
So what I tell people is there's no such thing as a wrong feeling. Feelings are just information. Okay. Feedback.
Yeah.
And sometimes the information, it's always information. And I tell people, when you say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. Well, I do.
Right.
And there's not a right or wrong feeling. There's right and wrong behavior. What you do with that feeling.
Correct. And you have the choice.
And you have the choice. You have the choice. So the important part is to be aware of what I'm feeling and what's the information that's telling me about what needs to change.
Right.
Do I need to change how I'm looking at the situation? Do I need to change my behavior? What's the information that's in the feeling? So yeah, it's a feedback.
And I think that so I think if I had a downfall of me, it is that I believe everyone's being honest, right? Like I believe everybody is doing the best they can with what they got.
Yeah.
Right. Like that. That's the way I'm naive.
Right.
Right. You could lie to my face. I mean, I can sense cues really well. I can read people really well. But like, I'm so going to give you the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
But I always believe that like people are trying to do the best they can with what they have. Right. That's what they know. That's what they grew up with. So I always have that like, okay, cool. Like they did that. I didn't think that was great, but I know why they did it.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not really mine to judge because at the end of the day, like I got to be so focused on myself that here's the thing. You can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
So like if I want to be a beacon of light for other people, I need to be a beacon of light first.
Right.
Which means I need to take care of myself. I need to make sure I'm eating right, look good, right? I need to make sure I'm motivated, I'm driven, because I can't help anyone else if I can't help myself.
Right.
And I think a lot of people who aren't at that level, they'd be like, oh, you're conceited, or like you're narcissistic. Like what? Narcissist? I'm helping people.
Right.
Right. Like it doesn't. But people don't know what to say because they're not used to seeing somebody do that.
Right.
Right. And I don't get offended. I'm like, that just makes no sense.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But that's kind of what you were saying, where men nowadays need to become a beacon of light first, go through that contrast, become a better version of themselves, and then help uplift others.
Right. Right. And one of the things, going back to men and feelings, it's interesting. Every time I see somebody being interviewed and they start to cry, invariably they'll stop and apologize.
Men.
I'm sorry. Men. Women will do it too sometimes. But I remember seeing the interview with Tom Brady, and there was a 8-year-old boy that said, you're my hero. Who's your hero? And he started to say, my dad. And he got all teary-eyed. And then he apologized. And I don't want men to have to apologize for having feelings.
Because they're natural.
Because they're natural. But we've been taught that's not a manly thing to do. And I think men are in a trap right now. How do I come to terms with expressing my feelings without my feelings controlling me?
Well, I think that's the key, right?
Yeah.
And this I think true is in a lot of areas. Like, it's okay to cry, but nobody wants to be around someone who's always crying.
Right. Right.
Right. There's
Absolutely.
the barrier. Yeah. I don't care if you're a man, woman. Like, I'll help you out. If every time we're together, you're just crying,
Yeah.
like we can't do this.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Because you need to take care of yourself first. So I think the message you're trying to say, yeah, it's okay to cry, but also understand like how you can still be, in this case, a man, right, and get your stuff done. Right. Don't feel bad for yourself. Cry. Right. You know, but it's okay to kind of, you know, have those emotions.
To have the soft side.
To have the soft side. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to be just all the time.
Right.
So for you, you've been a professor, a pastor.
Yep.
I'm missing some things here. What else have you been?
So I'm a therapist.
A therapist.
I'm a life coach.
Life coach. What would be 3 of the biggest lessons that you've learned in your life that you take with you every day?
I think it's the 3 ingredients. I do a workshop for men, but it's really for everybody. Have a hero, be a hero, and remember it's okay to cry.
Okay, so that's even on the tenets.
There it is. Yeah.
Okay. Can you go a little deeper in those, though?
Sure. We all need somebody to look up to, somebody that inspires us. You know, when I think it's pretty natural for little boys to want to be like their dad. I remember that was my story. I wanted to do everything my dad did. And then once I kind of went through my adolescent rebellion, my dad wasn't my hero anymore because I saw a different side of him. But there's always somebody that we need to look up to that will inspire us. We aren't the pinnacle.
Almost like a blueprint too.
Yeah.
Right.
So you were talking about knowing about jujitsu, knowing about business. Who do I look to that's going to inspire me to help me be a better version of myself?
And I think you can have different heroes in different areas of your life.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And some of them are face-to-face people, and some of them are people that I read about.
Right.
You know, this course in leadership that I teach. This woman said, "I want to be the kind of leader that Abraham Lincoln was." But we need these models, blueprints, as you said. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is to be a hero. What's the heroic thing to do? Not the selfish thing to do. What's the heroic thing to do? Dr. Phil says, every story needs a hero, and I want you to be the hero in your story.
Right.
But what's the heroic thing you're doing? Where are you setting your needs aside for the betterment of somebody else or the larger group?
But do you agree you can only do that if your self is first stable?
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely.
So that goes back to like, you have to become the hero first.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the classic thing about if you're in a plane and the air mask comes down, put yours on first,
right,
before you try to help other people. But it comes from, but you don't put your mask on and then see what you need to do to get out of there.
Oh, get like a second mask.
Right. But it's you take care of yourself. So I think that life is fulfilling when we live from a place of service. But it has to come from a joyful place, not an obligation.
Sure. Makes sense.
I always tell people, say yes until you resent having said yes.
That's a good tip.
If you say yes and resent it, or if you say no and resent it, you've crossed. There's the feedback.
So it was interesting. And the last one's learn to cry, which is self-explanatory. You were saying have a not to do list.
Right.
Right. And that almost reminded me of sometimes you have to say no to people.
Right.
Right. It's okay to say no. And I find, especially because I talk to women all the time, it's hard for them to say no. Right.
Right.
We have one of the ladies who's in jiu-jitsu. She's my age, in her 30s. And because of learning jiu-jitsu and the confidence it gives you, right, she's like, I'm able to say no now at work.
Yes.
Where she couldn't do it before. She's very sweet.
Yes.
You know, but like, it's okay to say no if you have, especially if you're going to resent it.
Right.
Right. What's the purpose of that? It's not going to help you. It's not going to help them.
Right.
So I think it's about like kind of like standing up for yourself.
It absolutely is.
So you do the course in leadership.
Right.
What are like the 2 or 3 best qualities of a true leader? Because I could be wrong about this, But back in the day, they didn't even like Abraham Lincoln.
Right.
Right?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. But,
okay,
but
sure.
Yeah. You've probably seen or you're familiar with the series Undercover Boss.
Sure.
Management by walking around. I think leaders need to know what's going on at the entry level.
Yeah.
And they need to be, it really gets me to watch that show. And it's like, wow, I didn't realize this was so hard. Well, those are the people that are putting money in your pocket.
Sure.
You need to have an appreciation for what's going on with them. So I think that one of the key things is being in touch with the lowest level of your organization, and letting them know that you're present and that you care. And the other thing, the second thing is, or I don't know which goes in order, but holding the vision for the organization.
Steering the ship.
Steering the ship. And if I am clear about where I'm going, and so there's a difference between, it's one of the things about Undercover Boss, there's a difference between a boss and a leader. A boss has employees, a leader has followers.
Sure.
And I think the people at the top need to come from a place of creating followers instead of being bosses.
And I think you do that by being genuine.
Absolutely.
Authentic.
Absolutely.
I definitely know that when we talk about business, it's honestly one of the reasons why I like to do it, but like sometimes I'll sweep the floor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like I swept the floor today before the coach came in who was going to clean it.
Right.
I was like, I already swept the floor.
Yeah.
I had extra time. I don't mind doing it.
Right.
But I'll do it. Sometimes she comes in and I don't have anything to do. I'll mop the floor while you vacuum.
Yeah.
Right? Because I was there. I still do that.
Right.
And I think people respect that.
Absolutely.
I also think that in business, like when you talk about holding the vision, so I always update the vision, but I let my staff know this is where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
I also say this, I've been doing this long enough. It used to really, when anybody leaves you, it's never fun.
Right.
But when they leave you, when you're like 16, 17, 18, 20, and you've been teaching them for a while or whatever, that really sucks because you don't have enough life experience to understand this is what's going to happen.
Right.
Right. Even bands break up after 50 years.
Yeah.
Right. So now I say to people, like, listen, like, I'm a train. The train's going. You can get on it. You can get off it whenever you want. The train is going. And that's how I see my vision of what's going on. Now, would I love for you to stay on it? Of course. But I also know it's not a jail sentence.
Right.
Right. Because if we don't vibe, or if you want to do something different, you can get off, but the train's going to still go.
Right.
Right. And that's been kind of my philosophy with business and the way I do my life. Like, I would love everybody I've ever met. But here's the thing. I understand people come into your life for a reason and they leave for a reason.
Right.
You just have to make both those reasons positive.
Right.
Right. Versus dwell on it.
Right.
Some of the best things I've ever done in my life have been after breakups with girlfriends. Right. Because
give me an example.
Give you a great example. So I'll give you two examples. Recently broke up, beginning of the year. Had some extra time. I'll be creative. Let me finish my children's book.
Okay.
Right? So when, head over heels, finish the children's book, did the podcast, continue running my business. Like, our business is going to grow this year, like almost 80%.
Wow. Nice.
Over last year. Staying true to the focus. Another one is I was about a month and away from getting married till we called off the wedding. Right? And I remember one of the jiu-jitsu students who had just started, who was an adult. He told me a couple months after, he's like, man, I didn't know what was going to happen to this school. He's like, because I've seen people who break up with women and then their life tanks.
Right.
He's like, but you just went, I started an online university. I was filming all the time. I was writing another book because I understand there's only two things that I can do in this point. I can accept it and make myself better.
Right.
Or I can wallow in it or just be sad.
Right.
I'm not that guy. Yeah, that happens, but like, you need to take everything that happens and bounce off it.
Right.
And make yourself better.
Right.
And so I wanted to be a better version of myself. So when stuff like that happens, I bounce back pretty quickly because my thoughts are aligned. I know what I need to do.
Yeah.
It didn't change the vision. Just people jumped off the train.
Right.
kind of thing.
Right.
So to end this podcast, what I like the guest to do is kind of look at the camera, but there's somebody watching this podcast who wants to change. They don't know how to change. They don't have the motivation to change. What would you tell them that they need to do? One of the first things they need to do, or what they need to do to change, to be authentic and to live the life that they want to live?
So what I would tell you to do is find somebody that accepts you for who you are and that challenges you to be who you can be. People talk about have a past and a present and a future. No, you have a past, you have a present. What's your potential? That's what I want to talk about. Find somebody that sees your potential and will help you create a plan to be who you can be. The Army used to say, join the Army and be all you can be. Well, I think that's what life is about.
And you know what's funny? So basically everything you said there is my children's book.
Okay.
Wrapped all in one.
Okay.
Right. But Barry, I enjoyed this. I think we could have went on for a long time. We probably have to do this again.
Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Dr. Marc Bochner. Don't forget to check out my new book, Pug Learns to Believe. Hey guys, Dr. Marc here. Now I know a lot of you want to know how we get all these amazing results with our clients, and it comes down to 3 things. The first is fun fitness classes that burn a lot of calories. 2 is giving you an accountability coach to make sure you stay on track and get the best results. And 3 is the nutrition. Included in the nutrition is our food supplements. So we pair with Prestige Labs because I feel they are the best, they have integrity, and they get great results. These are actually the supplements that I take as well. Here's the awesome part. By clicking the link below, you can save 40% off the retail price. So you need that link to actually save 40%. If you just go to the normal site without my link, you're paying full price, okay? So these are the supplements my clients use. If you are interested, definitely click the link below and it'll tell you all about them.